Finds. The opinions and views of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Naimbag nga gabi, masanto siya sa labid si kayo amin. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Mayong gabi sa Tibok Mindanao, Visayas, ug sa Luzon. Maupay nga gabi. Bismillah, Rahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. Ito po ang Republika at ako, si Erik Espina. Alam niyo po, sa mga palaging sumusunod sa aking programa, mapapansin ninyo na palaging binibigyan natin ng pansin itong ating tatalakayin ngayong usapin. Sapagkat ito po ay may kinalaman sa kapayapaan sa Katimugang Mindanao. Marahil hindi natin masyadong nauunawaan kung bakit patuloy ang kaguluhan o ang giyera sa Mindanao. Kailangan bigyan natin ito ng diin upang lalong magkaroon ng liwanag itong ating pagkaintindi sa ganitong klaseng mga problema. Kaya't binabalik natin sa hapagkainan ng sambayanan itong usaping ito. Importante na maintindihan natin ano ang relasyon ng Sabah sa kapayapaan, sa katahimikan ng ating pambansang katiwasayan. Ano ang kinalaman ng Royal Sultanate ng Sulu at Sabah, kung bakit nagkakagulo ang MILF at ano ang koneksyon ng MILF sa Malaysia, at ano ang titulo na hinahawakan ng Royal Sultanate ng Sulu at Sabah na nasa sentro dapat ng prosesong pangkapayapaan ng ating pamahalaan. Kaya sa gabing ito po, ay tututukan natin yung legal na usapin. Tamang-tama ay ating naanyayahan. Siya po ay si Datuk Sir Allan Paguia, isang batikang abogado. Siya po ay Royal Minister for Legal Affairs ng Royal Sultanate ng Sulu at Sabah. Yan po ang bago niyang hamon sa buhay. At pinalad po tayo na nandito rin His Royal Highness Prince Omar Kiram, Grand Prince and Foreign Minister ng Sultanate of Sulu and Sabah. Good evening to both of you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, just as a forward, in 1989, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee was exploring the possibility of dropping the Sabah claim. And then, Diosdado Macapagal, a former president, wrote a 12-page letter, single space, to then former Senator Leticia Ramos Shahani. And in brief, this is what he said. Simply dropping the claim will be futile because, violative as it is of international law and practice, it would be defeatist, unwise, and void act which cannot bind a future Philippine administration. There would be no legal obstacle to a subsequent government that may decide to retrieve a national right, protect the national interest, and fulfill a solemn duty to its citizens, particularly to the Sultanate of Sulu, to whom the government, in an express covenant, pledged protection and assistance to their rights and welfare. Prince Kiram, just as a briefer, how did all this trouble begin? And why are we here?
The Royal Sultanate of Sulu and Sabah was founded in 1405 by King Baginda. It soon rose to prominence as a most powerful kingdom of the Taosugs in southern Philippines. It fought Spain for over 377 years without surrender. And in 1658, the Sultan of Brunei sought the assistance of his royal cousin, the Sultan of Sulu, His Majesty Sultan Karamat Bakhtiar Uddin, to assist and quell the rebellion in Borneo, in the island of Borneo, because a usurper to the Brunei throne assassinated the Sultan of Brunei. And so the great Sultan of Sulu sent his more than 2,500 Tausug warrior force that put down the rebellion and installed the rightful Sultan of Brunei to the Brunei throne. As a consequence of that military assistance, the grateful Brunei Sultan gave as gifts eternal to the Sultan of Sulu the patrimony of Sabah, including Palawan and Spratlys, because the Sultan of Brunei owned the island of Borneo, including Luzon and Palawan at the time, prior to the coming of the Spaniards. And now, in 1878, the Sultan of Sulu, Sultan Jamalul Alam Kiram, rented Sabah, or North Borneo, to a British company. It was rented to the Overbeck and Brothers Dent, with the provisions that it cannot be transferred to any person, to any group, to any company or nation without the consent of His Majesty. That means the Sultan. However, this same company passed it on to the British government, who then took over Sabah in 1939 and made it into a British Crown colony in transgression and breach of the said rental agreement. And as a consequence, when the Britishers left Malaya in 1962 and it became a federation, the Malaysian government unlawfully occupied Sabah to this very day and usurp the authority to occupy Sabah, because they are the usurpers in interest. They are not the lessees in interest of the patrimony of Sabah.
Ipakita lang natin yung snippets. We'd like to show snippets of the 12-page letter of former President Diosdado Macapagal to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Yan po yung binasa ko kanina. At yung number 1, ito po yung right of Sultan of Sulu to Sabah. Yung number 1 lang. Yan. The contractual document has been verified as a lease in translations by a Dutch scholar who translated the term pajak as lease and a Spanish scholar as arrendamiento, the Spanish word for lease.
Yes.
Ang problema dito, Attorney Allan, is the Malaysians have a different interpretation of what pajak is. How should lease be understood in legal terms?
Well, lease refers only to the right to possess.
Okay.
It does not deal with the right of ownership, because in a lease there are two parties. You have the lessee and the lessor. The ownership always remains with the lessor, and the one who accepts the lease only has the possession, which is different from ownership. And so, for as long as the lessee recognizes the lease, then the ownership remains with the lessor. And it's just a matter of time before the lessor can actually reacquire effective possession over the subject of lease. And in law, especially the law of evidence, the existence of a lease creates the conclusive presumption of ownership in favor of the lessor. And the lessee has no standing in law, not even an iota of standing to question the ownership of the lessor.
So, Prince Kiram, what has happened? What is the interpretation of the Malaysian government of pajak? Because this is, I think, where the crucial issue is.
Yeah, the Malaysians called it cession.
So their interpretation of pajak is not lease but cession.
Cession, yes, correct, correct. So to them, cession, they are paying rental fee of 5,000 Malaysian dollars because they also misunderstood the provision of the lease that there would be payment of 5,000 Mexican dollars. Now, Mexican dollars was really the currency at the time of Spanish supremacy, and it was called the pieces of 8. But the Mexican dollars, as it were actually containing gold. So 5,000 Mexican dollars is not equivalent to 5,000 Malaysian dollars, nowhere near. It is equivalent to $20 million today. If you talk of 5,000 Malaysian dollars in gold, which was the currency used by Spain at the time, in today's dollars, it would be 20 million US dollars. But the Malaysians said, well, according to this lease of 1878, 5,000 Mexican dollars, no more Mexican dollars, but now we have Malaysian dollars, so we pay the heirs of the Sultan of Sulu 5,000 Malaysian dollars, which is equivalent to 1,500 US dollars.
To whom is the money given?
It is being paid to the lawyer of the royal family, the lawyer that was installed by the father of Sultan Fuad Kiram, by His Majesty Sultan Muhammad Ismail Kiram I, the Sultan from 1947 to 1973. His name is Atty Olka Ulama. He's practicing in Holo, Sulu. He's the one receiving the rental payment from Malaysia, from the Malaysian ambassador to Atty Olka Ulama to be distributed. But Sultan Fuad Kiram, who is one of the heirs, and his sister, Her Royal Highness Parmarsuli Kiram Guerson, never touched a cent of that so-called rental payment because of their revulsion to the word of the Malaysian cession. It was never cession.
Yeah, Atty Allan. Yeah.
The seeming controversy between the meaning of pajak, lease, or cession is more apparent than real.
Okay.
Because even assuming there is cession, what is ceded is merely the possession,
Okay.
not the ownership. But the Malaysians appear to be very, very practical businessmen here. They consider, number one, the Sultanate as a very peaceful leadership. They calibrate, they estimate that the Sultanate will not engage in any act of violence. So he will not force the issue to regain effective control over the possession of the territory. And number two, it will be very difficult to make a transition or to stop the Malaysians from exploiting the resources of Sabah, so that by just dragging the issue alone, they are already benefiting 1,000-fold. But the thing is, it is not in the definition of lease, it's not in the definition of, in the interpretation of lease as a cession or as whatever, but it is because the ownership precisely remains with the sovereign authority, the monarch, the sultan. And that what can be ceded, what can be leased is merely the possession.
Okay, for purposes of our audience, what is the difference between a lease, which you mentioned a while ago, and a cession?
A cession is simply a transfer of rights.
Okay.
Now, ownership is a compound of three rights.
Okay.
The right to possess,
Yes.
the right to use,
Use of rock.
and the right to dispose.
Okay.
The right to dispose is what is known in law as the naked ownership.
Okay.
Meaning, you can lend the possession, you can lend the use,
Okay.
you can lease the possession, you can lease the use, but unless you dispose of it, then you retain ownership over the same. So that here, in this particular case of Sabah, if you examine the lease contract, the pajak,
Yes.
there is a translation which reads permanent lease. Now, it cannot be a permanent lease. There's no such thing as a permanent
Is
lease.
that an oxymoron?
It is if you take it literally.
Okay.
But in law, you have to understand it to have a meaning, a substantive and functional meaning.
Uh-huh.
That therefore it should be taken in its proper context. The permanent lease would refer to the permanent intransferability of the lease for as long as the lessee,
Continues.
if it's a natural person,
Yeah.
is alive, or if it is an artificial person, for as long as the corporation exists.
Okay.
Meaning, once the lessee ceases to exist,
Uh-huh.
then the lease is terminated with it.
So you mean to say, on the part of the Sultanate of Sulu, on their own, they cannot end the session?
It already ended ipso facto by the fact that the British East India Company,
Okay.
Ceased to
the
exist.
lessee, has already ceased to exist.
Okay.
And or the Overbecks and the
Yes,
brothers
they all
then
died.
have already died.
So what we're
Therefore,
talking about is
by that fact,
Uh-huh.
there is no more lease. And those who claim to be successors to the lease are fooling themselves and fooling the international community by claiming something that has already expired by
Uh-huh.
force of law.
So they are not successors in lease.
Usurpers in interest is more like it, as stated by the Grand Prince.
Yes.
Okay.
There is also another fact that must be mentioned. The Malaysians made a big mistake by calling it cession, because in international law, cession means the transfer of a landed territory by a sovereign government to another sovereign government.
Mhm.
So it could not be a cession, because they are referring to 9 royal Kiram heirs of the Sultan.
Mhm.
So therefore, because they are private individuals, it was definitely rental or lease. So the Malaysians dug themselves into a hole. They are looking for something to support their illegal claim, but they further damage themselves by being proven to be illegal settlers of Sabah.
Mhm. Let me ask you, Atty Allan. They are in possession of Sabah. They can abuse it, abutendi, fruendi. What will stop them from saying, no, we're no longer going to pay the pajak?
I think they have already done that, except that what they are doing would really be constitutive of what is known in international law as an act of provocation. Except
Uh-huh.
that the good sultanate will never be provoked, because it's a very peaceful leadership,
Okay.
and that it will always abide by the international rule of law,
Okay.
and it will try to appeal to the conscience, the collective conscience of the family of nations,
Uh-huh.
to be able to get back its rightful patrimonial properties.
Let me ask you, Prince Omar, do they still continue to pay the Kiram family, or they've stopped already?
Now, they continue to pay
They
year after year, but
Yes.
in arrears. When we
I
say
think they
in arrears,
stopped a few years back.
they continued. What they do is they pay today what was the rent for
Last year.
last year. So therefore, it was in arrears.
So why?
Actually,
Yes. Why do the
the
Malaysians do that?
That's why they are in a quandary whether to continue or not
paying,
to continue.
yes.
Because if they continue, that is evidence that they don't own it.
Precisely. This is what. This is
Because
the quandary.
It is evidence of the lease.
Yes.
Now, if they don't continue it, they can see that they still they have no more right to the possession. Why?
Right.
Because you're not even paying lease.
Yes.
But in the first place, you're not even a lessee. You're not a successor of the original lessees. The word permanent lease in the contract, which they recognize, refers merely to the permanence of the right to use, the
Yes.
right to the fruits,
Yes.
for as long as the lessee, the person of the lessee, natural or artificial, continues to exist.
Okay.
But they have long gone.
Yes.
And that is why, if they are to act with justice,
Yes.
if they are to give everyone his due, if they are to act honestly and in good faith, they ought to turn over Sabah to the Sultanate of Sulu and Sabah.
For the simple mind, what is happening here is not what is called rent to own.
No.
It is not a rent to own. This is just the use.
Of the thing, of
Yes.
the possession.
Yes. Yes.
Well,
But they still continue to pay. And yet what will stop them, because they are already in violation anyway,
yes.
from stopping pure naked power saying we are no longer going to pay because Sabah is ours?
The family of the lessors, the Sultanate, refused to accept the puny amount that they are being offered. First, because it is not a just amount. Second, there is no legal basis. And to accept these amounts would be to recognize the continuance of the lease.
Of course.
There is no such recognition here. Because the Malaysians, by trying to be wise, by saying that they do not know who to pay the rental to, is actually recognizing the fact that the lessor continues to exist and that they have failed to establish their connection to the original lessees. Therefore, they are pure usurpers insofar as the possession and ownership of Sabah is concerned.
Okay. We're going to move to number 2. In the 12-page letter of former President Diosdado Macapagal, we're just trying to establish the timeline by which various governments recognize the sovereignty of the Sultanate of Sulu over Sabah. Here you have Lord Granville's letter, January 7, 1882, on behalf of the British government. And on quotation marks, the Crown in the present case grant of royal charter, the number 9 does not exist there, grant of royal charter to the British North Borneo Company assumes, and that's very clear, no dominion or sovereignty over the territory Sabah occupied by the company, and recognizes the grants of territory and the powers of government made and delegated by the sultans in whom the sovereignty remains vested. That is very clear. So, Republika will return after a few reminders. Please stay with us. Okay, nagbabalik po ang Republika at eto malinaw po dito sa ating number 2 na pinakita na talagang kinikilala pati ng British government ang soberanya ng Sultanate of Sulu. Nakapaloob dito ang Sabah. So this is very clear, no? Attorney Allan, no? The British government in this statement of Lord Granville recognizes the sovereignty of the Sultanate of Sulu over Sabah, no?
Yes.
So there is no denying this.
Yes.
No? And then dito sa number 3 naman, the British Embassy on November 19, 1906 in Washington DC, the US Department of State stated Sabah was not an imperial possession of the British Crown, that the British North Borneo Company, which leased Sabah from the administration with the standing of a government. Okay. So malinaw yan, ano? And then we have number 4. Para lang sunod-sunod na. Ito, number 4. During the American colonization administration of the Philippines, May 4, 1920, Governor Frank Carpenter acknowledged this is for emphasis, the temporal sovereignty and ecclesiastical authority of the Sultanate of Sulu beyond the territorial jurisdiction of the United States government, especially with reference to Borneo Sabah, which is a dependency of the Sultan of Sulu. So, kung ganitong kinikilala ang Sultanate of Sulu na may hawak sa Sabah, nung umalis ang mga Amerikano sa 1946, bakit Sino ba ang kinilala ng mga British? Kinilala ang mga Amerikano? At parang binastos ang ang Sultan of Sulu. Ganun ba nangyari?
Pinasa kasi ng Britain yung Sabah dun sa Federation of Malaysia. At dahil nga nandun sa mas malapit sa teritoryo nila yung Sabah, mas mahirap na ma-acquire natin yung control. But what we have to understand is, bakit kinilala dun sa mga binasa mo sa excerpts ni nung letter ni former President Macapagal, bakit kinilala nung British official yung Sultanate? The reason is elementary. The reason would be reduced to that one word, sovereignty, the essence of sovereignty. Kasi it is elementary in international law that in a monarchical government like the Sultanate, ecclesial and monarchical, the sovereignty is different from the sovereignty of a republic like the Philippines. Sa constitution natin, sovereignty resides in the people. And all government authority emanates from them. But in a sultanate, sovereignty resides in the sultan.
Yung sultan mismo.
The sultan, the person of the sultan. And the basis is history since the beginning of time. Why? This is what the Grand Prince always discusses as the law of primogeniture, bloodline. And this is very important. Even in all religion, this is very important. In political dynasties, this is very important. And even in families, this is very important. And this stems from the authority coming from Muhammad himself. Because the lessons of Islam is for leaders to take care to practice the Islamic faith not only in their private lives but also in governance. Kaya yun nga ang diferensya sa constitution natin The church and the state are the separation is inviolable. Kaya yung morality sa gobyerno iba sa morality sa pribadong buhay. Kaya yung sa sultan, yung sovereignty dito, all government authority emanates from the person of the sultan himself. Unlike in the Philippines, where the sovereignty resides in the Filipino people. And Pinoy, the justices of the Supreme Court, the senators, the congressmen, they are not sovereign. They are agents of the sovereign.
Yun, malinaw yun. Hindi sila ang pinamumugaran o ang mismong saan nanggagaling ang soberanya.
They have government authority, but that emanates from the sovereignty of the Filipino people, while in the Sultanate,
siya mismo,
government authority emanates from the person of the Sultan.
Sa isang demokratikong gobyerno, ang mga public officials ay mga ahente lamang. So saan nanggagaling? Where does sovereignty resides in a republican government?
In the hearts and minds of all Filipinos.
Of every individual.
Of 95 million Filipinos. But in a sultanate, sovereignty resides in the person of the last bloodline.
Siya ang parang fountainhead.
Correct.
And nobody else can become sultan
except father to son. Because no one can make a sultan, not even a government or the United Nations. Because to be a sultan is by bloodline. It is the law of royalty through primogeniture. Primogeniture is really the law of bloodline from father to son. Since ancient times, the people of the book practiced this. Abraham to Isaac, Isaac to Jacob, down to David, to Solomon, father to son. Now, even the Assyrian Empire, the great Assyrian Empire of Mesopotamia, when Assur-banipal became the emperor of Assyria, his son Assur-nasir-pal also became emperor. And so was the kingdom of Babylonia. When the great Nebuchadnezzar became the emperor, his son also became emperor. In our modern times, the emperor of Japan, the son of the emperor, must become emperor of Japan, no one else. The king of Thailand, his son must become the king of Thailand, no one else. The king of Cambodia must become the king of Cambodia through his son. Now, the son of the Sultan of Brunei will be the next Sultan of Brunei.
Nabanggit niyo yung Brunei, kinikilala ni Sultan Bolkiah si Sultan Fuad Kiram, no?
Correct, yes.
Wala na siyang ibang kinikilalang sultan, no?
He did not meet any other claimant because in 2009, during his state visit,
Okay.
Philippine government official presented 2 fake sultans to be met by Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah. But the reply from Royal Palace of Brunei was this: if His Majesty Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah must meet the Sultan of Sulu and Sabah, it must be the true Sultan of Sulu and Sabah, and here is the name: His Majesty Sultan Muhammad Fuad Abdullah Kiram I. Thus, an invitation was written by Her Excellency President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo on the 29th of January 2009, so that the 2 royal cousins, Sultan Hassanal and Sultan Fuad Kiram, could meet after 1658 in Malacanang Palace during his state visit.
Attorney Allan, what are the characteristics of sovereignty?
It is absolute.
Okay.
It's the only absolute power known in political law. And precisely this is the DNA of statehood. If you don't have sovereignty, you cannot be a republic. And sovereignty, loosely translated, means independence. Meaning you have absolute control to make your laws, to execute your laws, and to interpret your laws. But going back to the law of primogeniture, the bloodline law, there is an application in our constitution adopting this philosophy. That is the rule of jus sanguinis, the law of the blood. Citizenship in the Philippines follows the philosophy of the law of the blood. If your mother or father is a Filipino, then you are a Filipino. And in the same manner, copying the transfer of the right to rule from the father to the firstborn, and so on and so forth. But the basis is the bloodline. America is different, and they are similar countries. They follow the law of the soil, not the law of the blood. So even if your father or mother is an American, you are not necessarily an American. But you have to be born in America. Once you are born in America or in any of its controlled territories, you are automatically an American citizen. So in other words, it will be very difficult for Americans to understand the law of primogeniture. And that is why the Oriental system of monarchy, or those in Europe, is very difficult for the Americans to comprehend. And even with our fellow Filipinos who have been brought up along the mindset of American principles.
Prince Omar, I hear stories that the Malaysians are willing to buy Sabah from you for $1 billion.
No, there was a... They made an offer to a Malaysian company. It was an oblique offer, stating that they would develop parts of Sulu. They would offer some, dozen hectares of land in Kota Kinabalu, whereby the Sultan can build his palace and a mosque and madrasa. But of course, we torpedoed it down because Sabah is not for sale. Sabah must be returned to the Sultan of Sulu, and the current Sultan is His Majesty Sultan Fuad Kiram, because it is a patrimony of the Sultan. It is owned by the Sultan. It is not transferable. It is not divisible, and it cannot be sold because the Sultan will not sell Sabah. It is the legacy of the bloodline of the Sultans since 1457 to this day. And no Sultan of Sulu and Sabah would ever part with Sabah, because that is not only his patrimony, but also a legacy to the Tausug people. So therefore, that question of selling Sabah will never occur.
And if I may add, I think it would not be, it is simply ridiculous for the Sultanate to accept any payment for Sabah. Because the money is money coming from Sabah itself. It belongs to the Sultanate.
Correct.
So they're going to make use of money which is owned really by the Sultanate to pay for the Sabah is ridiculous.
Sa salitang kanto, niluluto ka sa sarili mong mantika.
Correct.
No, in other words, it's really use and abuse, usurpation of the illegal occupation of Sabah, because the Malaysians are illegally pumping about 1 million barrels of oil per day.
Prince Omar, I will give you a scenario. And I hope the Malaysians are not listening. Okay.
Watching.
They decide to go amend their constitution, Atty Allan, and they make an offer to the Kiram family. They will say, we will make you part of the rotation of sultans in Malaysia.
Now,
And you will now become part of the bloodline of the Kirams will become part of the Sultanate, ruling Malaysia.
you know, there was really an offer. We did not take it seriously, because we know the Malaysians are looking for a way out to legalize their illegal stay and occupation of Sabah. When we started in 2004, when His Majesty Sultan Fuad Kiram was crowned as Sultan of Sabah first, then Sultan of Sulu in 2006, we discussed that due to our moral ascendancy, due to the bloodline of the Sultan, due to his sovereignty, we know that Sabah will be returned to the crown of Sulu and Sabah. And that is true. Today, as we speak, we know that a promise or pledge was made by senior government officials of Indonesia to support the return of Sabah to the Sultan of Sulu and Sabah. And as a consequence, we, as the foreign minister of His Majesty Sultan Fuad Kiram, vested with the powers and authority to make this statement, that we state through the recommendation of our Royal Deputy Foreign Minister and our Royal Finance Minister, who is an Indonesian national, the Honorable Datuk Sir Mir Agong Sidayo, Baronet, we state now that with the support of the Indonesian government to the crown of Sulu and Sabah, to His Majesty Sultan Fuad Kiram, that we shall return the Ambalat region to Indonesia in the event of successful return of Sabah to the Sultan of Sulu, His Majesty Sultan Fuad Kiram.
Atty Allan, very briefly, what is the connection of the Sultanate of Sulu vis-a-vis the peace process, and how the Tausugs, being orphans, do not have their real rulers?
Yes, the original subject of the Sultanate of Sulu and Sabah are the Tausug people.
Yes.
And in fact, I understand that Sabah is dominated by mostly Tausug ancestry.
Yes.
And the relationship between this Tausug and the Sultanate is such that they are inseparable. While the Tausugs also have Filipino citizenship, there is what you call a conflicts of law situation, where in due time, the sovereignty of the Sultanate of Sulu will have to be reconciled with the sovereignty of the Republic of the Philippines as co-equals.
Yes, yes.
Not one being superior over
Or
the
the
other.
other.
But that has to be the subject of another negotiation.
Correct, correct.
And Prince Omar, before the program ends, I think there is a ceremony here. Of course, may we request you to do the honors. Paki-close up lang yung camera. Paki-alis yung card dyan. Yan. So, who are these individuals, Prince Omar?
This one is Prime Minister Najib Razak,
Yes.
the current Prime Minister. We say
Yes.
we do not approve of your illegal occupation of our Sabah patrimony,
Yes. And
the architect of the Sabah illegal occupation by Malaysia, Abdul Razak. We say, haram, illegal settlers, get out of our Sabah patrimony and property.
how come the MILF cannot make any statement with regards to the Sultanate of Sulu and Sabah?
I think they do. I think they do.
The
In fact,
MILF?
they MILF.
Yes.
MILF is a different story. The Tripoli agreement is with the MNLF.
Okay.
And in fact, the Republic has been remiss in the performance of its contractual duties with respect to the Tripoli Agreement since 1996. But the MILF is a diversionary organization sponsored, I understand, by Malaysian funds.
What should be the role of the Philippines now in with regards to the Sultanate of Sulu and Sabah?
They should be real, they should be honest, we should study history, and there is no denying the undeniable that the Sultanate exists because of the continuing existence of the law of the bloodline or the law of primogeniture, and we have the 35th descendant of the original Sultan of Sulu in the person of Sultan Muhammad Fuad Abdullah Kiram I, and that Sultanate is a sovereign, distinct and separate from the sovereignty of the Filipino people.
Very briefly, Prince Omar.
Yes. Dear viewers, we have gone a long way from 2004 to this day. Today, we are supported by Indonesia, including tiny East Timor, Uganda, and Vanuatu, and of course St. Lucia, and many other nations, because we do have royal cultural ambassadors in 30 nations today, who all support the recovery of Sabah from the illegal occupation of Malaysia. We believe that it is only a matter of time, and Sabah will be returned to the Sultan of Sulu, the true owner of patrimony of Sabah, and Malaysia must know that their stay in Sabah is not welcome, that they are still regarded as illegal settler and haram settler, and therefore, being unlawful, they must conform to the international law. You do not have any right to stay in Sabah, so get out and give Sabah back to us.
Thank you very much, Prince Omar Kiram. Thank you very much, Attorney Allan. Sana po'y naunawaan ninyo kung bakit palagi nating binibigyan ng pagkakataon itong ganitong klaseng issue, sapagkat ang kapayapaan po sa Mindanao ay talagang may kinalaman dito sa pamilya ng mga Kiram at sa teritoryo ng Sabah. Pag nabalik po itong Sabah at naibalik sa pamilya ng mga Kiram, sigurado po magkakaroon ng katahimikan dyan sa Katimugang Mindanao. Ito po si Erik Espina, palagi po nagsasabi sa inyo, magmasid, makialam, higit sa lahat po ay manindigan, sapagkat wala pong magmamahal sa Pilipino kung hindi ang Pilipino. Daghang salamat, maayong gabi kaninyong tanan.